You know what ruins most conversations? It's this invisible scoreboard people are carrying around in their heads. They walk into a disagreement, a negotiation, even a casual chat, and they're already tallying up points. Who's got the better argument? Who looks smarter? Who's going to leave the room feeling like the winner? And when you've got that scoreboard mentality running in the background, you're not actually talking to a human being anymore. You're playing a game. And here's the kicker: the person you're talking to, they can feel it. They might not be able to name it, but they sense it, the tension, the push, the subtle competition. And suddenly, instead of a moment to connect, you're locked in a battle to prove yourself. Think about the last time you argued with someone, maybe a partner, maybe a friend, maybe a coworker. Did it feel like two people collaborating, or two boxers waiting for the other one to drop their guard so they could throw the knockout punch? That's the scoreboard talking. And here's the truth: every time you try to win a conversation, you've already lost. Because you might walk away with your pride intact, you might even get the last word, but you've burned the bridge in the process. And what's a conversation for if not to build bridges? The moment you drop the scoreboard, you change the entire game. You stop asking, "How do I win?" and start asking, "How do we move forward?" That single shift is like flipping a switch in your communication. People feel safer around you. They lower their guard. They stop bracing for the counterattack, and ironically, that's when your influence skyrockets. Because no one trusts a fighter who's always swinging, but everyone leans into someone who makes them feel understood. Now, let me be real. Dropping the scoreboard doesn't mean you roll over. It doesn't mean you stop having opinions or boundaries. What it means is you stop treating every interaction like a courtroom. You don't need a verdict at the end of every sentence. You don't need to prove you're right at the cost of connection. Confidence isn't about proving, it's about choosing. Choosing when to speak, choosing when to hold, choosing to protect the relationship over protecting your ego. That's real strength. Picture this: two people are disagreeing. Person A is locked in. Every sentence they say is sharp, defensive, loaded with but and actually, and no, you're wrong. Person B, on the other hand, is calm. They're not racing to pile on evidence. They're not trying to trap the other person in a corner. They're listening. They're responding slowly. They're asking questions. Which one looks more confident? Which one would you trust to handle a crisis, to lead a team, to be in a healthy relationship? It's never the one trying to score points. It's always the one who knows they don't need to. When you drop the scoreboard, you free yourself. You free yourself from chasing the last word. You free yourself from the exhausting cycle of proving yourself over and over again. And you free yourself from the fear that being wrong somehow makes you less. Imagine walking into every conversation without that pressure. No need to win. Just the curiosity to learn, the courage to listen, and the clarity to stand your ground without turning it into a battle. That is how you instantly improve your communication without saying a single extra word. But here's where it gets even more powerful. Because once you've dropped the scoreboard, once you've stopped treating communication like a competition, something else becomes possible. You can finally listen like you mean it. And let me tell you, this right here is the move that separates the average communicator from the unforgettable one. Most people don't listen, they wait. They wait for their turn to talk. They wait for the pause so they can jump in with their story, their angle, their defense. And while they're waiting, their brain isn't focused on the other person. It's rehearsing their response, which means they miss the actual words. They miss the tone. They miss the message between the lines, and then they wonder why the other person doesn't feel heard. Listening like you mean it is an entirely different posture. It's leaning in, It's quieting the noise in your own head so you can actually absorb what the other person is saying. It's listening with your body language, your eyes, your silence. People can feel when you're doing this, and when they do, walls come down fast, because nothing disarms defensiveness faster than feeling genuinely heard. Here's what happens when you really listen: people stop fighting you. They stop trying to shout louder just to get through. They stop seeing you as an opponent. Instead, they start to see you as someone on their side, even if you disagree. And that shift, when they go from adversary to ally, is where real influence begins. Now let's get practical. How do you listen like you mean it? You cut the rush. You stop finishing their sentences. You stop cutting them off mid-thought because you're so eager to drop your bomb. Instead, you let them finish. You wait a beat longer than feels natural before you respond. That pause communicates respect. It tells them, I wasn't just waiting to talk. I was actually processing what you said. And here's the crazy part: when you listen like that, people often talk themselves out of their own defensiveness. They start with anger or resistance, but as you give them space, as you don't push back, their tone softens. Their words get clearer. They feel safe enough to admit, well, maybe I overreacted, or, okay, I see your point. You didn't have to fight for that moment. You created the space for it by shutting up long enough to let it happen. Listening like you mean it is also about asking clarifying questions instead of jumping to conclusions. Instead of saying, that's wrong, you say, tell me more about why you feel that way. Instead of shutting them down, you open them up. And guess what? When people feel open, they're far more likely to open up to you in return. That's not weakness. That's leadership. Most people think strong communication is about having the perfect comeback. No, it's about creating a climate where the comeback isn't even necessary. Because when someone feels truly heard, they're already halfway to meeting you where you are. So let me hit you with this truth. Dropping the scoreboard changes the way you walk into the conversation, and listening like you mean it changes the way the other person walks out of it. Combine those two. You're unstoppable. You've just turned every conversation from a contest into a connection, and the crazy thing, that's when you actually end up winning without ever trying to. You've dropped the scoreboard. You've started to actually listen like you mean it. And now comes the next level, the one that separates the communicators who build trust from the ones who blow it up without even realizing. It's this learning the difference between responding and reacting. Because if you don't master this, I don't care how sharp your words are, how clever your arguments are, or how calm you think you sound, people won't remember your point. They'll only remember your reaction. Here's the thing, reacting is easy. It's the default. It's what your brain does when it feels attacked, challenged, or even just slightly uncomfortable. Someone throws a jab at you in a meeting. Boom, you clap back with sarcasm. A friend makes a comment that stings. Snap, you throw one right back. A partner says something in the heat of the moment. Bang, you raise your voice, cut them off, or drop that line you know is going to sting just as badly. That's reacting. It's fast, it's fiery, and 9 times out of 10, it makes the situation worse. Responding, though, that's discipline. That's you choosing, not just blurting. Responding is measured. It's intentional. It's when you take a breath, hold space for the moment, and decide what's actually going to serve the conversation instead of just serving your ego. And let me tell you, when you learn to respond instead of react, your communication transforms overnight, because suddenly you're not the fire starter in the room. You're the calm in the storm. Let me paint the picture. Imagine you're in a meeting. Someone criticizes your idea. Maybe they say it bluntly, maybe even unfairly. A reaction would be snapping back. Well, that's not true, or you just don't get it. That feels good for about 2 seconds, right? But what happens after? The room tightens. defenses rise. Now it's not about the idea anymore, it's about the clash, but a response. A response sounds like this: I hear your concern. Can you tell me more about what part doesn't land for you? Same situation, entirely different energy. The first one fuels conflict. The second one invites collaboration. Which one do you think makes you look more confident? Here's the irony: reacting feels powerful in the moment, but it always makes you smaller. Responding might feel slower, maybe even a little vulnerable, but it makes you bigger. It makes you someone people trust, someone they lean on, someone they want to follow, because anybody can throw a punch. Not everybody can stand in the ring and refuse to swing until it's actually worth it. Now, let me tell you why we react so much. It's not because we're bad people. It's because our nervous system is wired that way. You feel attacked, your body floods with adrenaline. Your brain goes into fight or flight mode. And when you're in that state, your mouth becomes a weapon. But here's the secret: you don't have to let your biology dictate your behavior. That's the skill we're building. You can feel the surge without letting it run the show. So how do you do it? Step 1, create space. And the simplest way to create space is with silence. That tiny pause, that deep breath, that split-second delay between what you feel and what you say, that's the gap where wisdom lies. If you can stretch that gap, even by a few seconds, you've already shifted from reaction to response, because now you're choosing instead of firing. Step 2, ask yourself this one question before you open your mouth. What's my goal here? If your goal is to win, to get the last word, to land the knockout blow, you're about to react. If your goal is to move the conversation forward, to protect the relationship, to be heard in a way that actually lands, you're about to respond. That tiny check and resets everything. And step 3, remember that not every attack requires a counterattack. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Silence can be louder than words when it's used with intention. When you refuse to engage in the mud, you show everybody in the room that you're above it. And that silence, it often speaks volumes about your strength. Let me give you a real-life example. A client of mine once told me she was constantly reacting in her team meetings. Every time her boss criticized her, she felt like she had to defend herself immediately. The result, she came across as defensive, combative, hard to work with. But once she learned to pause, breathe, and simply say, "I hear you, let me think on that," the whole dynamic changed. Suddenly her boss saw her as composed, thoughtful, professional. Nothing about her skills had changed. Just her shift from reaction to response. That's the power. And listen, I'm not saying it's easy. Responding takes practice. It takes self-control. It takes you being willing to let go of that little rush you get from clapping back. But the payoff, it's massive. Because once you master it, people start to see you differently. They stop bracing around you. They stop expecting conflict. Instead, they see you as safe, steady, and strong. And that reputation, it follows you everywhere in your career, your relationships, your life. Here's the bottom line: reacting is impulse. Responding is influence. One burns the bridge, the other builds it. And the moment you choose to respond instead of react, you stop being at the mercy of your emotions and start being in control of your communication. That's when you step into real power, not the power to win a fight, but the power to change the entire tone of the conversation. Here's the trap a lot of us fall into when we want to sound confident. We think louder means stronger. We think if we raise our voice, if we project more, if we fill the room with volume, people will automatically take us seriously. But volume isn't confidence. Let me say that again. Volume isn't confidence. Volume is just decibels. What people actually follow, what actually lands, what actually sticks in their mind. It isn't how loud you said it, it's how clear you made it. Think about it. How many times have you been in a room where somebody was speaking at the top of their lungs, almost shouting, and you still had no clue what they were saying? You heard the noise, but you didn't catch the message. That's not power. That's wasted air. Now think about the opposite, someone who doesn't even need to raise their voice, but when they speak, the room goes quiet. Everyone leans in. Every word feels intentional, sharp, simple. That's clarity, and that's the real engine of confidence. Here's the truth. Confident communicators don't need to compete for space. They don't need to overpower you with noise. They own their presence through precision. And when you strip away the fluff, the filler, the long-winded tangents, what's left is undeniable. Clear words cut through like glass. People stop asking, what did they mean? Because they already know. And that certainty, that's what people remember. Let me give you an example. Imagine a manager addressing their team. Manager A speaks loud, fast, filling every silence with more words. Okay, so what I really want to get across here is that this project is like super important, and I know we're all busy, but if we could just try harder, like maybe put in some extra time, then I think maybe we could hopefully hit the deadline. You hear that, and all you feel is overwhelmed and uncertain. Now, Manager B, calm tone, steady pace, simple language. This project is a priority. I need us focused this week. Here's the goal. Here's the deadline. Let's get it done. See the difference. One raises their volume, but buries the message. The other lowers the noise and makes the message crystal clear. Which one sounds more confident? Which one do you follow? Always the one with clarity. Now, here's why this matters. Volume is reactive. It's what we do when we're trying to prove we deserve to be heard. But clarity is proactive. Clarity says, I don't need to prove anything. I know what I'm saying. I know it matters. And I trust you'll hear it. That's what makes people stop and listen. The best communicators are editors. They don't just think about what they want to say, they cut away what they don't need. They're ruthless with filler. They're allergic to over-explaining. They don't dress their sentences up in unnecessary decoration. Because they know this, every extra word dilutes the impact. Every like, just, or hopefully chips away at authority. Confidence isn't about saying more, it's about saying enough. And here's the kicker, clarity also protects relationships. Because so much conflict doesn't come from disagreement, it comes from miscommunication. People aren't upset because they didn't like what you said. They're upset because they didn't understand what you meant. Ambiguity breeds confusion, and confusion breeds conflict. But when you're clear about your boundaries, clear about your needs, clear about your intentions, you remove that fog. And when there's no fog, there's no room for the story in their head to spiral into something it isn't. Let's take it into personal life. Imagine you're frustrated with your partner. You say loudly, "You never listen to me." That's volume, and it's vague. What does never mean? When? About what? All your partner hears is an attack, and now they're defensive. But clarity sounds like this. When I talk about my day and you're on your phone, I feel ignored. I need your attention for 5 minutes. That's specific. That's actionable. And you don't need to shout because the words already carry weight. Here's the principle: people can argue with your tone, but they can't argue with clarity. If you scream, "You never listen," the fight becomes about your exaggeration or your yelling. But if you calmly and clearly say, "I need your attention for 5 minutes," there's nothing to debate. They either give it or they don't. And in that moment, you've already won, not because you were loud, but because you were precise. Let's make it practical. How do you build clarity? First, slow down. Rushed words get tangled. Slower words give your brain time to line up the message. Second, simplify. If your sentence has 3 commas, break it into 3 sentences. Shorter hits harder. Third, cut the disclaimers. Stop padding your words with, "This might sound dumb, but," or "I'm not sure, but." You're sabotaging yourself before you even start. Confidence doesn't pre-apologize, And here's the bonus: clarity actually lowers conflict. Because when people know exactly what you mean, they stop guessing, they stop assuming, they stop inventing a narrative in their head. Instead, they deal with the truth that's right in front of them. And even if they don't like that truth, they respect it more than they ever would your raised voice. The irony of all this is beautiful. The less you focus on being loud, the more people actually hear you, because they're not distracted by the noise. They're drawn to the message. They're leaning in, not tuning out. And when that happens, you don't just communicate, you lead. So remember this: loud doesn't mean strong. Loud doesn't mean confident. Loud just means loud. Clarity, though, that's authority. That's the voice people replay in their head long after the conversation is over. Because confidence doesn't live in your volume, it lives in your precision. Here's one of the biggest habits that quietly kills confidence in communication: seeking permission every time you open your mouth. And I'm not talking about basic courtesy like asking, "Hey, do you mind if I sit here?" That's respect. I'm talking about the deeper habit of shrinking your voice before it even leaves your lips. It sounds like this: "I could be wrong, but does that make sense?" I don't know, maybe this is dumb, but every single time you do that, you're handing your authority away before the other person even has a chance to respond. Let me tell you something: if you act like your words need permission to exist, people will treat them that way. You are literally teaching others how much weight to give your voice. And when you frame your ideas like a question mark instead of a statement, you're telling the world, "I don't fully believe in this. Can you validate it for me?" And trust me, people pick up on that energy instantly. Now, here's the twist: you don't even realize you're doing it half the time. It's so ingrained. Maybe you grew up learning not to rock the boat. Maybe you were told to stay humble, to stay agreeable, to not come across as too direct. Maybe at work, you saw that people who disagreed got labeled as difficult, so you softened your edges to avoid the label. And before long, your whole communication style became one giant disclaimer. But here's the problem: when you keep asking permission to speak, people stop listening to what you say and only hear how unsure you are when you say it. Confidence doesn't sound like asking, "Is it okay if I share something?" Confidence sounds like, "Here's what I see." Confidence doesn't sound like, "Does that make sense?" Confidence sounds like, "Let me know if you need me to explain it differently." See the shift? The first one puts the responsibility on them to validate you. The second one keeps your authority intact while still respecting the other person. That's the balance. And let me be real with you. There are times when asking for permission is a mask for fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being wrong, fear of taking up space. And the only way to break that pattern is to rip the mask off, to catch yourself mid-sentence and cut out the fluff, to start saying what you mean without the cushion of self-doubt. Because here's the truth: your voice doesn't need permission, it needs conviction. Picture this: two people present the exact same idea in a meeting. Person A says, I don't know if this is right, but I was thinking maybe we could, try a different approach. Person B says, here's another approach we could try. Same idea, exact same thought. But which one gets written down? Which one gets remembered? Which one moves the needle? Always the one that doesn't ask permission to exist. And listen, I know what some of you are thinking, but Jefferson, if I don't soften my words, won't I come across as arrogant? Won't I seem too blunt? No. Let me set you free right now. Confidence and arrogance are not the same thing. Arrogance dismisses others. Confidence respects others while standing firm in itself. You don't need to water down your message to prove you're humble. You just need to deliver it clearly, respectfully, and without apology. The irony is that when you stop seeking permission, people actually respect you more because they don't have to waste energy pulling the truth out of you. They don't have to guess what you're trying to say. They don't have to reassure you every 5 seconds. They get to engage with your idea at full strength. And that saves time, builds trust, and positions you as someone who knows what they're about. So how do you break the habit? Start small. Replace the weak openers. Instead of, I could be wrong, but just say, here's what I think. Instead of, maybe it's just me, but just say, here's what I noticed. Instead of, does that make sense? Try. Any questions about that? It's subtle, but it shifts the entire power dynamic, because one way you're asking to be validated, and the other way you're owning the value you've already brought. And then practice holding the silence after you speak. This is big. Most people rush to fill the silence with nervous babbling, like they're afraid their words won't hold weight on their own. But silence is where your words sink in. Silence communicates, I trust what I just said to stand on its own. And when you can hold that silence without shrinking, people feel the difference. Look, permission seeking is just a habit, and like any habit, it can be unlearned. But you have to catch it in the wild. Pay attention to your words this week. Write down the phrases you use that soften your voice. Circle every, maybe, every, I don't know. Then challenge yourself to strip them out. The first few times will feel scary. It'll feel like stepping on stage without a safety net. But then something powerful will happen. You'll realize the ground doesn't crack when you stand firm. The world doesn't crumble when you stop asking for validation. In fact, people lean in closer, because here's the truth: permission is something you give yourself, not something the world gives you. And the moment you stop asking for it, you start communicating from a place of true confidence. You stop sounding like someone hoping to be heard, and you start sounding like someone worth listening to. And that shift, it's magnetic. It changes not just how others hear you, but how you hear yourself.